Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
The C40-9, also known as the Standard Cab-9, is a one-of-a-kind locomotive that only the Norfolk Southern Railway used between 1995 and 2018. They have resumed their Dash 8 counterparts. Only the Dash 9s have air conditioners on the top, rather as the Dash 8s did not. 125 of these locomotives were built, numbering from 8764 to 8888, in continuation with the numbers of the Dash 8s. However, starting in 2015, these locomotives began to be rebuilt as AC-44C6M locomotives, and as more time went on, these locomotives began to disappear. They will become more rare. This is an unfortunate tale of what happened to one of the last C40-9s. March 18, 2018, late at night. A meet was to take place at a siding outside of Georgetown, Kentucky at about 15 miles north of Lexington between two manifest trains. One of these trains is NS train M74, a freight train from Brosness Yard in Macon, Georgia to Elkhart, Indiana, will continue by on the main line while the southbound train was to take the siding. The train had been recrewed at Burnside, Kentucky at around 6 p.m. that evening and it left at 6:50 p.m. M74 was powered by 3 locomotives, with BNSF ES44C4 6584 leading and 2 Norfolk Southern Dash 9 44CWs number 9110 and 9523, pulling 142 freight cars.
Meanwhile, in the opposite direction was southbound train 175, a manifest heading from Bellevue, Ohio to Macon, Georgia, where from there, the train would then be taken to the Florida East Coast Boating Yard in Jacksonville, Florida. The train was recrewed at the yard at Sharonville, Ohio at 4:45 p.m. that evening, and at 8:01 p.m., the train got underway again, continuing south, with Kevin Tobergti as the engineer and Andrew Hall as the conductor. The train is powered by 5 locomotives, with the last 2 trailing dead in tow, and 127 cars. Leading was C40-9 8798, AC-44C6M 4063, SD-70 Ace 1167, and ex-Burlington Northern SD-40-2s 3482 and 3467. This train was to stop at the Georgetown siding to allow M74 to pass by on the main line. And at 11:13 p.m., Train 175 was nearing CP Acres doing 35 miles an hour. The train had passed the signal at milepost 69.9 to alert the crew that they should be slowing the train down for a gentle stop at the signal, not that far up ahead. Only the train keeps on going. And as the train is almost to the signal at milepost 72.4 at the end of the siding, the engineer then throws on the emergency brakes, realizing his mistake, but because of his late reaction, he overshot the signal. The engineer then puts about 8 feet of slack in to make a move to reverse the train back onto the siding, but at the same time, M74 rounds the curve at milepost 73, heading towards the signal, doing almost 40 miles an hour. The engineer of M74 couldn't see 175 until just mere moments ahead of him. He throws on the brakes, slowing the train down from 39 to 32 miles an hour. Then all 4 crew members on both trains make an attempt to bail out, but it was already too late to prevent disaster.
M74 collided with 175 at 11:14 p.m. The resulting impact caused about 5,700 gallons of diesel fuel to leak from the locomotive's fuel tanks and caught fire. Tauber was covered in fuel and sand, and his further injuries left him trapped in the cab. When he could finally escape, he lay down on the ground and waited for help. Both M74 crew members and Hall, who were able to escape, moved through the woods to an open field away from the fire, where at a nearby house they asked the residents to call 911. The engineer of 6584 then called the dispatch center and spoke to the chief dispatcher, informing him of the accident. All 4 crew members were injured but were alive and were taken to a nearby hospital for their injuries.
The damage to the locomotives was brutal. 6584 had its front plow damaged, but the rest of the unit was fine. The 2 trailing Dash 9s took little damage, and the force of the impact derailed all 3 locomotives and 13 cars from M74. Meanwhile, 8798's cab and body were torched, and part of the frame destroyed when 4063 had telescoped into the lead unit, ripping off almost half the frame, and landed on top of it. And it too also suffered fire and frame damage. And while at it, the front truck fell out, and 1167 had landed on top of the fallen truck. The SD40s had escaped heavy damage. The only other damage in the wreck was the 119th car on train 175, which began leaking sulfuric acid. The wreck happened near a trailer home complex, and over 400 residents who lived about a quarter mile from the crash site were evacuated to a nearby school as an added precaution. The scene was a mess. Burned locomotives, leaking cargo from derailed freight cars, bent rails, damaged or destroyed signals. What caused this to happen? And why?
The Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA for short, opened an investigation into the cause of the wreck. As standard practice, drug and alcohol tests were run on the crew members. Fortunately, all tests came back negative for drugs and alcohol. They didn't fall asleep, and they were not using their cell phones while on duty. So what else could it be? Conductor Hall claimed that the milepost 69 signal was clear and that the engineer didn't acknowledge him, but Tauber stated that it was an approach signal instead. The two may have had a small argument and lost situation awareness of the next signal, and didn't realize how far it was to the signal until it was right in front of them. But could the signal have failed? Later tests reviewed that there were no problem with the signals. They were working intact and displaying the proper signal aspect. The milepost 69 signal was an approach, and the following signal at milepost 72.2 was red. As for M74, the last signal they passed was at milepost 74.8, which was an approach signal, so clearly this was at fault at 175's crew. Another reason for this being preventable is that the milepost 69 and 72 signals were visible from over 1,000 feet away, so the engineer of 175 did indeed have time to react appropriately. Both the event and video recorders on 8798 were destroyed by the fire, and the 2 other event recorders were found to be inoperable. The event recorder data from 4063 and 6584 were downloaded and analyzed. Nothing could be found to put the crew at M74 at fault, as they followed all operation rules. But as investigators were looking into the crew members of 175, they specifically looked at Tauber, and boy, he did have some history to tell. He had worked as a yard conductor for more than 11 years before he was required to enter engineering training. That lasted for almost 2.5 years. Between when he started engineering training in January 2015 and late February 2017, he had failed numerous tests, such as the use of both automatic and dynamic brakes, how to properly perform a exhaust breathing, knowledge of physical characteristics of a line, knowledge and application of operation speeds, and knowledge of signal locations and speed restrictions. Not to mention, he had failed to call out an approach signal before.
Something else to note in his records is that in mid-April 2015, a few months after he began training, he passed a stop signal without authority. As part of disciplinary action, his training was interrupted for more than 1.5 years, not to mention being decertified for 30 days. Now, where did he pass the red signal? None other than on the same track at CP Acres. So he had prior experience running on this line before, and he was trained in the fields of locomotive operation, not to mention both coaches who had trained him felt he wasn't ready to be an engineer yet because he was still struggling with some of the basic knowledge of the line. Yet despite their objections, the FRA still certified him just shy of a year before the accident. Long story short, Tobergti shouldn't have even been there that night. As for conductor Andrew Hall, who's been working for the railroad for about 3.5 years, he failed to call up the approach and stop signals before the train had reached the end of the siding. But that's not all. Per Norfolk Southern operating rules, when a train goes into emergency, the conductor is supposed to call dispatch, say emergency 3 times, and give the train symbol and location to alert all other traffic in the general vicinity that this train could be in danger. That call was never made. So had the call been made, it would have been emergency, 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 NS 175 at Georgetown. If the conductor had made the call, the crew of M74 would have been made aware of this, and they would have taken appropriate actions to slow or stop the train to allow 175 to back up onto the siding, and the collision may have never even happened. The lack of communication between Tobergti and Hall on calling out signals and following proper railroad operating rules, as well as a lack of situational awareness, all contributed to the accident. But there was still one more factor that could have prevented it all.
Positive Train Control, or PTC for short, should have stopped the wreck, but it didn't. Why? Turns out that all but one of the locomotives had PTC installed, and the line which was running on, the former Southern Railway Cincinnati, New Orleans, Texas Pacific line, had PTC active. Here's the thing though, the FRA approved PTC implementation plans for Norfolk Southern at the time to have only 10 to 25% of the trains running on this line to have active PTC. BNSF 6584 was equipped with it, however it wasn't interoperable with the NS system. Then it was found that 8798 did not have PTC installed at all, while the remainder of the locomotives on the train did. While 4063 did have a working PTC system, it had dynamic braking issues due to the system not functioning. Repairs had been done a month prior to address this issue, however it arose again just days before the accident, making the locomotive unsafe to lead a train. So the only other locomotive could have safely lead the train was 1157. Had 1157 been leading the train instead, in the same scenario, an alarm would have been sent to Talbot, warning them that he was approaching a red signal and needed to slow down. But if he had failed to acknowledge the warning and take proper actions, the brakes would come on automatically, stopping the train and preventing a disaster from happening. All in all, 2 trains with non-PTC compliant leading locomotives with an inexperienced engineer with a checkered history was a wreck waiting to happen. In the end, Talbot and Hall were found responsible for the accident, and the wreck cost over $4 million in damage. The railroad filed a federal lawsuit against the 2 men, determining them liability for the expense. However, they filed a countersuit claiming that the railroad itself was at fault, not them, for allowing a locomotive without PTC to lead the train, not to mention having a locomotive with pre-existing braking issues. The jury assigned to the case, giving both parties 21 days from December 21st to get together and discuss the recent countersuit and how it could be solved.
In the end, after the accident, 8798 and 4063 were deemed damaged and burned beyond repair and were scrapped on site. The remaining units were towed to Juniata shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where they were repaired and returned back to service. 4063 became the first and only C6M so far to be retired after its involvement in a wreck. I should mention that this unit had been rebuilt from a standard cab Dash 9 like 8798, originally numbered as 8821. A weird note I'd like to point out is that 8799, the sister locomotive to 8798, was rebuilt by American Motive Power in September 2015 as NS 4000, the first AC-44 C6M rebuild. But what's sad about 8798 is that it was nearing the end of its career anyways. It was one of less than 10 C40-9s on the roster left, and it was going to be retired in the up-and-coming months. Upon being retired and sent for rebuild, 8798 would be renumbered to 4107, one number off of 4106, rebuilt from 8806, which for a time had been the last standard cab Dash 9 remaining on Norfolk Southern's roster. However, that came to end. 8806 made its final run on NS Train 38Q that October, and on October 12th, 8806 had arrived at the Juniata shops. And on October 30th, 2018, the day before Halloween, 8806 was officially retired, meaning the age of standard cab Dash 9s was over. I fortunately had the opportunity to see it just months before it was retired, leading this empty coke train on the BNS 7 east to Dubuque, Illinois. Believe it or not, it was my first time even going there, so talk about a treat. I got so many good surprises that day, and this one is perhaps maybe one of the biggest. It will always be marked as a treasure in my videos. Since 8798 was scrapped, the number 4107 was left vacant for the next few months until another locomotive could be found to take its place. Around the same time 8806 was retired, C44-9W 8941 was retired, and it was rebuilt into the 4107 instead. 8941 would become the first wide cab Dash 9 to be rebuilt as a C6M. 9110 would be retired just a little more than a year after the accident in April 2019, and was then sent for rebuild and came out as AC44 C6M 4259. And is still around to this day. All the standard cab Dash 9s have been rebuilt. Now, hundreds of the traditional wide cab Dash 9s have been rebuilt, and the AC44 C6M rebuild program still continues today. In the past, 9523, 3467, and even 4107 were all put into storage, but 4107 has since came back. When the other units will return is unknown.
It has been 4 years since this accident. Whether or not PTC could have stopped the wreck or not is up to debate, but it's a good thing to know that the main lines today are now more protected with this new railing system. Even though the age of the standard cab Dash 9s have ended, the legacy they left behind will never disappear. I love making videos for you guys, including these trainer documentaries as well. However, occasionally I may not be able to do all of them as you guys request me to do. But however, I will continue on as much as I can to make these videos for you guys. As some of you guys might know, some documentary videos, including this one, have not been uploaded on the actual anniversary. And the reason why is because I'm literally starting these train wreck documentaries just days before the anniversary approaches. And I do apologize for this happening, but hopefully in the future I will not have that issue again. I would really like to give a huge thanks to TrainMasterX for helping me out with the script, narrating, as well as letting me borrow some of his videos to make this documentary possible. I highly recommend you go check out his channel as well, since he does similar documentaries to Thunderbolt 1000 Siren Productions. His channel will be linked in the description below. Anyways, I do apologize for not getting this anniversary out on time, and it's already like almost 2 weeks late, but sometimes it depends on my motive and life too. But don't worry, I'll be alright. I'll probably take a break from these documentaries for a little bit until April or May, until I get the motive to work again. But anyways, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye.